In the heart of northeastern Brazil lies Maranhão, a state renowned for its rich culture, colonial history, and natural beauty. Yet, between the 1990s and early 2000s, this region became the backdrop for one of the most horrifying crime sprees in Brazilian history. A shadow of fear descended over the rural communities, as dozens of boys went missing, only to be found later in grotesque circumstances. The culprit was a man few suspected, a bicycle repairman named Francisco das Chagas Rodrigues de Brito. His name would come to be associated with some of the most heinous crimes in the nation's history, earning him the grim moniker the Butcher of Maranhão. Francisco das Chagas Rodrigues de Brito was born in 1965 in São Luís, Maranhão's capital. The oldest of several siblings, Chagas grew up in crushing poverty, a condition that shaped much of his early life. His father, a laborer, struggled to provide for the family, and his mother was often distant, overwhelmed by the demands of raising multiple children. Those who knew the family described Chagas as a quiet and withdrawn child who rarely spoke unless spoken to. But beneath his reserved exterior lurked signs of a deeply troubled mind. As a young boy, Chagas displayed disturbing behavior, including cruelty to animals, a behavior often considered an early indicator of violent tendencies. He also seemed fixated on death, showing an unusual curiosity about corpses and burial rituals. These signs, however, were dismissed as mere eccentricities by his family and community, a tragic oversight that would later have devastating consequences. By his teenage years, Chagas dropped out of school and began working menial jobs to support his family. He eventually trained as a bicycle repairman, a skill that allowed him to eke out a modest living. To his neighbors and acquaintances, Chagas was an unremarkable man, known for his quiet demeanor and work ethic. No one could have imagined the horrors he would unleash on their community. The first known disappearance linked to Chagas occurred in the late 1980s. A boy from a small village outside São Luís vanished without a trace. His parents, desperate for answers, reported his disappearance to the police, but no leads emerged. Days later, the boy's body was discovered in a remote wooded area, mutilated beyond recognition. His death sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community, but the case went cold due to a lack of evidence and resources. Over the next decade, similar cases began to surface across Maranhão. Boys aged 8 to 15 would go missing, often while playing near their homes or on their way to run errands. Their bodies were later found in isolated locations, displaying the same horrifying signs of mutilation. What set these crimes apart was the chilling signature left by the killer: genital mutilation. This gruesome detail suggested a level of depravity and a deeply rooted psychological disturbance. Despite the growing number of victims, local law enforcement struggled to connect the dots. Many of the victims came from poor, rural families whose concerns were often dismissed or overlooked. The police were underfunded, understaffed, and ill-equipped to handle such a complex case. This allowed the killer to operate with impunity, preying on vulnerable children while eluding capture. Chagas exploited his surroundings masterfully. As a bicycle repairman, he often interacted with children, gaining their trust with ease. He would lure them with promises of gifts, candy, or small amounts of money, leading them into secluded areas where he committed his unspeakable crimes. Afterward, he would return to his normal life, showing no signs of guilt or remorse. By the early 2000s, the number of victims had grown alarmingly, and the community's fear reached a boiling point. Parents no longer allowed their children to play outside, and rumors of a butcher began to spread. The media picked up on the story, amplifying the panic and placing pressure on law enforcement to act. A special task force was formed to investigate the string of murders, pooling resources from multiple jurisdictions in an effort to identify the killer. The breakthrough came in 2004 when a young boy managed to escape an attempted abduction. Terrified but alive, he provided investigators with a description of his attacker, a middle-aged man with a bicycle. This vital clue led police to Francisco das Chagas Rodrigues de Brito, whose name had already surfaced in connection with several earlier cases. When police arrested Chagas at his modest home, the community was stunned. Many refused to believe that the quiet bicycle repairman could be capable of such atrocities. But as investigators delved into his life, a disturbing pattern emerged. Chagas had lived and worked in areas where the murders had occurred, and physical evidence began to link him directly to several of the crimes. During a search of his home, police found tools and materials that matched those used in the mutilations. Under intense interrogation, Chagas confessed to the murders, providing chillingly detailed accounts of his crimes. He admitted to killing at least 42 boys, describing how he lured them, what he did to them, and where he left their bodies. His calm demeanor during these confessions horrified investigators. Psychologists and criminal profilers were brought in to analyze Chagas, hoping to understand what drove him to commit such heinous acts. Their findings painted a portrait of a deeply disturbed individual. Chagas exhibited traits consistent with psychopathy, a lack of empathy, an inability to form meaningful emotional connections, and a propensity for manipulation. His childhood abuse and neglect likely contributed to his twisted worldview, fueling his desire for control and dominance over his victims. The trial of Francisco das Chagas Rodrigues de Brito began in 2006, drawing national attention. Families of the victims packed the courtroom, many clutching photographs of their lost sons. Outside, crowds gathered to demand justice, their anger and grief palpable. Prosecutors described Chagas as a cold, calculating predator who targeted the most vulnerable members of society. The defense, meanwhile, argued that he was mentally ill and incapable of understanding the full extent of his actions. In the end, the evidence was overwhelming. Chagas was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to over 500 years in prison. The verdict provided a measure of closure for the victims' families, but the scars left by his crimes would never fully heal. The case of Francisco das Chagas Rodrigues de Brito sent shockwaves through Brazil, exposing systemic failures in law enforcement and the vulnerabilities of marginalized communities. The lack of resources and attention given to the initial cases allowed Chagas to operate unchecked for years, costing countless lives. In response, authorities introduced reforms aimed at improving the investigation of missing children cases, particularly in rural areas. Grassroots organizations also emerged, dedicated to protecting vulnerable children and raising awareness about the dangers they face. Despite these efforts, the trauma inflicted by Chagas' crimes lingers in Maranhão. For the families of his victims, the pain is a constant companion, a reminder of the sons they lost too soon. Yet, their resilience and determination to seek justice have inspired others, turning their tragedy into a call for change. Francisco das Chagas Rodrigues de Brito's name will forever be associated with darkness, but the strength of those he harmed stands as a testament to the human spirit's capacity for endurance. While his crimes revealed the depths of human depravity, the response of the community and the reforms that followed demonstrate the power of collective action in the face of evil. The chilling legacy of Francisco das Chagas Rodrigues de Brito extends beyond the monstrous acts he committed. His case remains a haunting reminder of how societal neglect, systemic inequality, and personal trauma can converge to create a figure capable of such unspeakable atrocities. But even as the shadow of his actions lingers, efforts to rebuild and heal continue. The community of Maranhão, once paralyzed by fear, has gradually reclaimed its sense of security. Grassroots organizations, many led by the families of Chagas victims, have become powerful advocates for child protection in Brazil. These groups focus on education, outreach, and the implementation of programs designed to ensure that the voices of marginalized communities are no longer ignored. One such organization, Filhos de Luz Children of Light, was founded by a coalition of grieving mothers and fathers determined to turn their personal pain into a force for change. By raising awareness about child safety, advocating for better policing, and pushing for stricter laws against child predators, the organization has become a beacon of hope for many families. Its leaders have also worked tirelessly to create a support network for other parents who have endured the tragedy of losing a child to violence. "Losing my son was the darkest moment of my life," one mother explained during an interview with a local newspaper. "But I knew I couldn't let his death be in vain. This work helps me honor his memory." Nationally, the case of Francisco das Chagas sparked widespread reform. One of the most significant changes was the implementation of stricter protocols for investigating missing children. The creation of a centralized database for tracking missing persons has improved coordination between law enforcement agencies across Brazil. In addition, the government has increased funding for rural police departments, ensuring they have the resources necessary to respond effectively to complex cases. Psychological support services have also become more accessible in the wake of Chagas crimes. Recognizing the long-term trauma inflicted on both victims' families and entire communities, state and local governments have invested in counseling and mental health programs. These services aim to help individuals process their grief and begin the long journey toward healing. For criminologists and psychologists, Chagas' case remains a source of study and debate. His ability to evade capture for so long, coupled with the specific nature of his crimes, has led to numerous discussions about the role of psychology in preventing such acts. Researchers have delved into his early life, examining the interplay of environmental and genetic factors that may have contributed to his violent behavior. This case underscores the importance of early intervention, said Dr. Carla Mendes, a leading forensic psychologist in Brazil. Children who experience abuse, neglect, or other forms of trauma need access to resources that can help them heal. Without these interventions, the cycle of violence can perpetuate itself. Even as experts dissect his motives and methods, Chagas himself remains largely unrepentant. Now serving multiple life sentences in a maximum security prison, he has reportedly shown little remorse for his actions. Prison officials describe him as an unremarkable inmate who largely keeps to himself, a stark contrast to the monstrous persona revealed during his trial. In one of the few interviews he has granted from prison, Chagas deflected responsibility for his crimes, claiming he was driven by forces beyond his control. "I am not the only one to blame," he said cryptically. "The world made me this way." His words, devoid of accountability, have only deepened the public's revulsion toward him. Despite the profound impact of Chagas' crimes, the human spirit's resilience shines through in the stories of those who have chosen to rebuild. Communities in Maranhão have banded together, creating safer environments for their children. Schools now incorporate lessons on personal safety and the importance of vigilance, empowering children to recognize and report potential dangers. Art and storytelling have also played a crucial role in the healing process. Local artists have created murals and plays that pay tribute to the victims, ensuring their stories are not forgotten. These works of art serve as both a cathartic outlet for grief and a reminder of the need to protect the most vulnerable members of society. One particularly moving mural in São Luís features the faces of several victims surrounded by symbols of hope, such as doves and rays of sunlight breaking through dark clouds. Below the mural, a plaque reads, "Their light will guide us toward a safer tomorrow." As the years pass, the lessons learned from the case of Francisco das Chagas Rodrigues de Brito continue to resonate. His crimes exposed vulnerabilities in Brazil's justice system, but they also inspired significant progress. The reforms and advocacy efforts that followed are a testament to the power of collective action and the determination to build a better future. For the families of the victims, the pain will never fully disappear, but many take comfort in knowing their loved ones' stories have sparked meaningful change. As one father said during a memorial service, "Our children deserved better. While we cannot bring them back, we can honor their memory by ensuring no other family has to endure what we did." The story of Francisco das Chagas Rodrigues de Brito is one of darkness, but also of resilience. It is a reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink, but also of its capacity to rise, to fight, and to heal. In the end, it is the strength of those left behind, their courage, their advocacy, and their unwavering love that truly defines this story.